Hey everybody, welcome to week 5 of PS 231. I know it's hard to believe, but by the end of this week, you will be 1/3 of the way done with this class. You will be 1/3 of your way into knowing all of game theory. No, that one isn't true, but the first one was true. The first one is true. You'll be 1/3 of the way through. We will be 1/3 of the way through of this together. You're doing a great job, keep it up, etc. And given that we're at this monumental juncture of our time together, 1/3 of the way in to our class, which is ostensibly about game theory, I have decided to celebrate the occasion by teaching you about games. And you're like, why didn't you start there, fat man? It's a good question. I think it's important not to. I was just saying this in my other class, actually. You can't unsee games once you see them. You can't. It's hard to see the world any way differently, at least within the rationalist paradigm. And if you've seen a game, it gets really hard to see other versions. And so that's one reason I wanted to spend just a separate week on bargaining and optimality, was just so that you could see that multiple decision makers create problems. And not problems that they intend to. I mean, they create bargaining problems sometimes, or all sorts of other different problems. And how we solve a problem, or sort of what the quantitative nature of a problem is, as opposed to its qualitative essential nature, that's all determined by a game. But the game isn't the problem. The game is just something that happens in the context of a given modeling problem, like bargaining. And so it's come time for us to just talk about games and how it all sort of fits together in this rationalist paradigm that we've slowly built over 4 weeks. So most classes of this type, if you took this class with other professors, chances are that what is lecture 5 will be lecture 1. Like, you could imagine that we just hit the reset button. You could imagine that we just hit the reset button and that today is the day after syllabus day. All right? And I'm sure that several of you are eager to do that. But I think that you should be able to appreciate some of this stuff that I'll be showing you in the coming weeks. I hope that you'll see these as constructs. I hope that you'll see games. I'm talking to my hands. I'm not a very good actor, as you know by now, but I'm talking to my hands like this is the to be or not to be speech. And I'm like, games. You know, I hope that you can see that these games, they're stories. They're fables that we tell in the framework of this world that we've created. We now have a canvas to work in. It's so easy, especially once the symbols start getting on the screen. It's just so easy to say, oh, well, this is how it is. And that isn't true. This is all designed. I'm going to try to tell you stories using all of the tools that we've been working on. And a game is just a story. A game is just a story. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, is how do we tell stories? How do we write down particular fables now that we've set it up? It's set up just perfectly now. Oh, good job, Professor Rob. Thanks, other Professor Rob. It's all set up so perfectly right now. It's going to be a long lecture. If this is how I am, it's going to be a long lecture. This is also the second one that I'm taping today, so my voice might get really weak as I get loopier and loopier, in which case, please don't link this video anywhere just in case I was really stupid as opposed to just kind of stupid. We'll see. Now, I'm a little bit weird in the sense that I think that the first 4 weeks are just as important as what I'm going to be showing you the rest of the way. Most people in political science, when they talk about rational choice theory, or when they talk about formal theory, or if they think about mathematical theory in the social sciences, they are, by definition, only talking about game theory. They're only talking about what we're starting with today. All right? And these important questions about what rationality is, and how it could be violated, and the nuances that its assumptions bring into the analysis, for most people, these are not especially important or interesting things to talk about. Reasonable people can disagree. So we're going to start slowly, because this is day 1, but you're a new you. but we're still going to have to start slowly. We're going to build up the logic of games. I just want to spend today on what is a game? How do we encode a strategic situation? How do we write a fable? A complete, cohesive fable with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And today I want to talk about the beginning and the middle of those stories. And we'll talk about the ending in the coming weeks when we talk about how to make predictions based on a game. So today's lecture should be, you might have to take fewer notes. You're not going to be writing as much. I hope that you can just start to drink in some of the fables as I tell them to you. A lot of this is going to be showing you the same thing over and over from different angles so that eventually you get bored about what makes a game a game. What is a game? What makes a game a game? How would I know a game when I saw one? What tells me one game from a different game? I want the answers to those questions to be completely boring for you, which means I'm going to have to repeat myself a lot today. But by the end of today's lecture, I sincerely hope that not only do you know what a game is, you're ready to analyze them. You're excited to get to it. All right? So we're going to proceed in 3 steps today. So in the A block, I will start from a simple introductory game. I will just introduce a single game in isolation. It'll be an important one. And I'll use that to show you all of the components of a game. So we'll be answering what is a game by way of example. Okay? In the B block, I want to talk about all sorts of different important games that we might talk about. Many of these games will be of the 2-player, 2-action variety. There's a certain set of fables that we all know, like the backbone ones, where if I see a given strategic situation, I might say, well, that looks like this one fable I know. So I want to show you a bunch of those simple fables, and then maybe a couple more extensive ones as well. And then in the C block, I want to talk about sort of the basics of analyzing a game and starting to move toward thinking about the ending of the story. How do we read in a game? What is a method of analysis that takes a game and spits out a prediction? Sounds like a function, right? How do we take games and turn them into predictions? And I'm going to talk about one particular way to do that by way of an important concept called dominance. And this dominance concept, we'll see, gives us a powerful and intuitive way to analyze a game. The problem is it isn't always a super applicable one. And we're going to have to make trade-offs as analysts. And we're going to have to learn how to navigate those. So today I'll show you one extreme point of that. So by the end of the lecture, you should have taken what you know about utility and rationality and preferences and begun to turn them into an official social analysis by way of game theory. So this is officially the class that you thought you were taking now. So we might as well get started. So back before there were pandemics, people used to drive all the time. People still drive all the time, but fewer people drive. And driving provides, if you ask me, one of the most important strategic problems out there. You're like, wait, I thought I signed up for a poli-sci class. You'll see. So, I'm a driver and you're a driver. We are 2 drivers. Separate drivers. We're 2 separate drivers. I have a car, you have a car. We are separate drivers. Now, we're going in opposite directions. Let's say that I'm going, I don't know, what's a road here? Lincoln. Let's say I'm going north on Lincoln and you're going south on Lincoln. All right? Now, suppose also that we live in a world of absolute anarchy. Which is weird because we both managed to move to Champaign-Urbana to be affiliated with the university that wouldn't be there under anarchy, but just stay with me. Imagine that everything is functioning except for what side of the road people drive on. Okay? So I have to choose what side of the road to drive on as I go north up Lincoln. And you have to choose what side of the road to drive on as you drive south on Lincoln. Okay? I would have chosen Green Street for this, but that's a mess that professors try to avoid. Which sucks because then I can't get the Potbelly I can drive on the left side of the road or the right side of the road. And you can drive on the left side of the road or the right side of the road. Let's just suppose that we're both smart enough to not drive right down the middle, which is a pretty big if with many of the people that drive around Champaign, Urbana, but leave those people aside. We're driving down a side of the road. I've got to choose whether to drive on the left or the right, and you've got to choose whether to drive on the left or the right. Now, let's think this through. If we both drive on the left side of the road, like we're in England, then we won't crash into one another because I will be on the moving north left side of the road. You'll be on the left side of the road from your perspective, and we won't hit one another. I'll put in a drawing of a car to help. That'll be us. We won't hit one another. That'll be great. Likewise, if you drive on the right side of the road and I drive on the right side of the road, it'll be a flipped world. It's like we put the world in the mirror, but we don't hit one another in either of those worlds, right? So that's sort of the way that things play out most of the time in the United States or other countries where you drive on the right side of the road. So two of the outcomes are good. We get to drive where we're going and we don't get crashed into, which generally is frowned upon. Now, suppose that I drove on the left side of the road and you drove on the right side of the road. Well, that means that going north, I'm on the left, and going north, you're on the left. We just fiery car crash. That's bad. Likewise, if I drove on the right side and you drove on the left side. So, two of the outcomes yield happiness, peace, bliss. We're driving, we're going to go do awesome things somewhere. And two of the outcomes are... Well, let's suppose that getting where you're going is worth 1 happiness point. And two of the outcomes yield that happiness point, right? The one where... So we need to think about... Right? So if we both drive on the left, 1 happiness point for each of us. And if we both drive on the right, 1 happiness point for each of us. All right? Now, two of the alternatives yield, and let's assign that 0 happiness points. Dying in a fiery car crash, 0 happiness points. Okay, well, that means that the left-right combination yields 0 for me and 0 for you. And the right-left one yields 0 for me and 0 for you. So we have a utility function, right? We both have a utility function, but what's the input of the utility function? What determines whether we have 1 happiness point for getting where we're going or 0 happiness points for... What determines that? You're going to get really tired of that, I bet. That one was a dud. What's the input of our utility function? Well, it's a combination of strategies. It's a combination of choices. It's my choice and your choice. Notice that my choice isn't enough. If you know my choice, you don't know enough to know my outcome. Why? Well, if I drive on the left, then whether I get 1 happiness point for peace or 0 happiness points for depends on what you did. It isn't just me. We're interdependent now. Right? So it reads in it's not enough to just read in my choice. We had you of Coke, you of Pepsi, you of Sprite, or you of starting a war. We haven't had you of my choice and your choice. That's game theory. What makes game theory is that the input of your utility function isn't just your choice. The way to encode interdependence is to define a utility function on a Cartesian product of action sets. And you're like, what is he talking about? Stay with me. So suppose that I could gather my available alternatives into an action set, call it capital A. So in this case, capital A is left or right. That's my set of choices. A sub Rob is left-right. And the same for you. A sub U is left or right. Those are your available actions. Those are your available possible actions. That's Coke, Pepsi, and Sprite for you right now. Is what action will you choose? So I've got these two sets, each has two elements, and actually they're the same set in this case. They don't have to be, you'll see. Well, what's the Cartesian product of those two sets? Remember, the Cartesian product is the set of all possible combinations of two sets. It's the set of all ordered pairs that you could make using the two sets, where the first entry in the ordered pair is my choice, and the second entry in the ordered pair is your choice. Okay? If I worked out the Cartesian product of this 2 by 2 situation, I'd have 4 possibilities. I'd have 4 parentheticals. I'd have 4 ordered pairs. What are they? Well, they're left, 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 right, right, left, and right, right. So these are the inputs of my utility function. This is what we just said I needed to know in order to know how much happiness I'm experiencing, as opposed to just checking to see if my flesh is burning. That seems like a very game theorist thing to do. You know, like you're dying in a car crash and you're like, I feel my utility going down. My happiness numbers are diminishing. I need a sandwich. That's my solution to most problems. And you're like, we noticed. So basically, we need to think about Cartesian products of action sets. Now, in this simple example of 2 players and 2 actions, there's a very easy way for us to draw that out. What do I mean? Well, you might remember back from lecture 1 that you could draw a Cartesian product sort of like in this tabular format, right? So I'm going to take my choices. I'm going to call myself the row player now, all right? Or I'll just keep referring to myself as me, because my therapist encourages me to not refer to myself as other people. Well, Professor Carroll thinks that this is great. Okay, so the row player can go left or right. I can go left or right. Okay? And the column player can go left or right. Okay? So look, now I can take each of those 4 elements in the Cartesian product has one and only one cell in this little matrix that I've made. See, this is the thing, is if I didn't show you all this other stuff first and I just told you what a game is, you'd be like, a game is a matrix. Not so! A matrix summarizes a game for us, but it's not the same thing. So I've got these 4 quadrants of this matrix, okay? And the northwest one is the world where we both went to the left. We both drove on the left side of the road. The northeast one is the one where I drove on the left side of the road and you drove on the right side of the road. The southwest one is the one where I drove on the right side of the road and you drove on the left side of the road. And the southeast one, it's hard to keep track. I'm already bad at east versus west, much less when I have to flip it. So the southeast one is the one where I drove on the right and you drove on the right. Okay? So those are outcomes. Those are the 4 outcomes. An outcome is just a strategy profile. A strategy profile is just a vector of everybody's choices, of a bunch of strategies, of a bunch of choices. So now we have this matrix depiction of our game. All that's left is to fill in the utility numbers. Okay? Well, we know that in the left-left profile, the utility of left-left for me is 1, and for you, it's 1. So I'm just going to put 1, 1 there, where my number comes first and your number comes second. Row player is first and column player comes second. That's the convention. That's just a convention. You'll get used to it. It'll take some time, but you'll get used to it. Thankfully, you'll have lots to practice with, and you're like, oh boy, I'm excited. The left-right profile, that northeast corner, well, fiery car crash. So I get 0 happiness points and you get 0 happiness points. The southwest one, I drove on the right and you drove on the left. 0 happiness points for me, 0 happiness points for you. And finally, in the southeast corner, I'm on the right, you're on the right, no fiery car crash, I get 1 happiness point and you get 1 happiness point. So this is a matrix depiction of a game. This is a matrix presentation of a game. This is just our way of saying there are 4 outcomes. Those outcomes are determined by each player's choice, and there is a utility function for each player associated to each outcome. So here we are, game theory. Okay? Note that I just as easily could have written left, left, indifferent to right, right, strictly better than the right, left, indifferent to left, right for me, and right, right, indifferent to left, left, strictly better than left, right, indifferent to right, left for you. Could have done that. Matrix, way easier. But there's always the possibility, we're still working with the same preference relations that we were before. It's just now we get to work with utility numbers to make things easier. And I'm being glib about 0 happiness points and 1 happiness points because it's pretty obvious in this picture now that we're making ordinal comparisons. It won't matter if it's 1 happiness point or 10, or a half, or an eighth. All that matters is that it's strictly more than 0. And likewise with 0, dying in a fiery car crash might be worth negative Google happiness points, but all that really matters is that it's less than 1. Just think about a doodle and how you could assign whatever numbers you wanted to a doodle on the one problem set. This is a very famous game. This is one of the famous 2x2 games. Why is it 2x2? 2 players, each with 2 alternatives to choose from. 2x2. There's a lot of 2x2 games out there. This is one of the most famous 2x2 games, and it's called a coordination game. Why? Well, we would like to coordinate on going left or coordinate on going right. This is an example of a matrix representation of a game. An interesting question is, what is a game? Well, a game is actually super simple. But how would you encode it in a way? This doesn't look like something a computer could understand right off the top of its head. Right? How do you encode this? How do you put this in terms of sets and functions and logic? Why am I still doing this? It's super simple, let me tell you. So, I'll do a 2x2. I'll show you how a 2x2 version looks in code first, and then I'll show you an n-player version, okay? The 2x2 will be enough to really get your intuitions honed. So a 2-player game is the following. It's a set of 2 players, whatever their names are, maybe A and B, or 1 and 2, Rob and Chewy, you and me, Sang-hoon and Chancellor Jones. 2 players, in a set of players. Call that N. Suppose that each player has an action set, capital A sub I. Now, in the last example, that action set was left-right for me and left-right for you. But it could be, for example, just to keep things 2x2, maybe I can go up or down and you can go left or right. So now we've got 2 different action sets. Okay? So we need 2 action sets, and for this to be a 2x2 game, we'll just say each action set has 2 elements. And finally, each player has a utility function that reads in the Cartesian product of those action sets, which is to say the set of all strategy profiles, right? Remember that a parenthetical collection of choices for the players, that's called a strategy profile, one for everybody. So it reads in strategy profiles, that Cartesian product, and it spits out happiness numbers. That's a game. A set of players, a set of actions, and a set of preferences. Let me repeat this, because you're gonna see so many things in drawings and math and symbols, blah, blah, blah. Hi. I just want you to know that a game is 3 things, and the rest is details. 3 things make a game, and tell you one game from a different game. The rest are details. 1, who are the players? 2, what can they do? 3, what do they want? That's it. That's it. A game has 3 things. Who are the players? What can they do? How do they feel about the outcomes? Where an outcome is a combination of choices by the players. That's it. That's it. That's it. That's all that a game is. And look, we're literally writing a fable. We say, who are the dramatis personae? What can they do? And how do they feel about the outcomes? What are their motivations? What do they want? That's it. That's it. That's a game. That's a strategic situation. That's everything that you need to know about the very basics of a strategic situation. Now, any given strategic situation might have more wrinkles, right? But this is the core about what makes a strategic problem a strategic problem. The rest is details. So just to show you, I can take this list that I have, 2 players, where A sub A is UD, up and down, and A sub B is left and right. Yeah. So I can write out the Cartesian product that's up left, up right, down left, down right. I'll just assign some utility numbers to these just to keep things fun. It's all in a matrix. But that matrix depended on who were the players, what were their available actions, and what did they want. This strategy profile thing, the fact that my happiness depends not just on my own choices, is really what sets game theory apart. That's what makes a game a game. That's what makes game theory game theory. So in neoclassical microeconomic models, how happy I am depends on the bundle that I bought. How much Coke I bought, how much Diet Coke I bought, how much A&W I bought. How happy I am in one of these models doesn't depend on your choices. It depends only on what I was able to buy given my income and the prices. It's not interdependent the same way. So this is very much the fact that if I drive on the left side of the road, I don't know if I'm going to get 1 happiness point for peace or 0 happiness points for psh. The fact that I don't know that is because of game theory. That's game theory personified. That is what game theory looks like, is you don't know. And it's not that you don't know because the world is uncertain. It's that you don't know because you don't know what other people are going to do. So let's just work through a slightly more complicated example, and we'll have plenty of examples in the next block as well, but I just want to make sure that while we're talking about Cartesian products and all that sort of stuff, I just want to make sure that we have a chance to see a slightly more extensive example. So let's keep it with 2 players. Let's call them A and B. And let's suppose that each player has 3 alternatives instead of 2. So they've got 3 strategies to choose from, 3 actions to choose from, all right? So imagine that I'm a player and you're a player. I'm A and you're B. And here are the choices. And let's say that we have the same choices. We can choose rock. We can choose paper. Or we can choose scissors. And for this, you're paying! So suppose that we're playing rock, paper, scissors. How would you encode rock, paper, scissors? Maybe you've never played rock, paper, scissors. So here's the idea of rock, paper, scissors. So this is the way that kids decide things. So on the count of 3, we simultaneously, these are all simultaneous moves. The idea here is it's all simultaneous. We'll talk about time later, but right now, people are making their choices at the same time. All right? So suppose that we simultaneously have to choose whether to throw rock, paper, or scissors. All right? And the idea here is that if I throw rock and you throw scissors, then I win. But if I throw rock and you throw paper, for reasons that nobody has ever fully understood, paper beats rock because it can envelop the rock. I don't know. So paper beats rock and rock beats scissors. And of course, scissors beats paper. Just imagine me cutting my hand to death with these scissor fingers. Okay? So rock beats scissors, scissor beats paper, paper beats rock. And so kids will simultaneously throw, they'll go 1, 2, 3, shoot. 1, 2, 3, shoot. 1, 2, 3, shoot. Until we figure out who the winner is, okay? But now each action set has 3 things in it, not 2, which means we have a bigger Cartesian product to worry about, right? So now we have to think, row player, player A, me, I can go rock, paper, scissors. And column player, player B, that's you, can go rock, paper, scissors. So this Cartesian product has 9 elements in it. Rock, 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 paper, rock, scissors. Paper, rock, paper, 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 scissors. Scissors, rock, scissors, paper, scissors, scissors. So there's 9 elements in there. Okay, now if we throw the same thing, if I throw scissors and you throw scissors, then we play again. So let's call that a tie. And let's say ties give you 0 happiness points. So where is that? Well, rock, rock, paper, paper, scissors, scissors. It's on this diagonal. Yeah? So everywhere along the diagonal, I get 0 and you get 0 because we tied and we have to play again. Now let's think about rock, paper. All right, that top middle one. Rock, paper. Well, I threw rock and you threw paper. You beat me. So I get -1, we'll say, and you get 1. And so the same thing happens. So here at rock, scissors, I win because rock beats scissors. And so I get 1 happiness point and you get -1 happiness points. And I'll do the middle row. Well, this is paper versus rock. I win. That's 1 -1. 0, 0 in the middle. Paper versus scissors. You threw scissors, I threw paper. You win. So that's -1, 1. Bottom row. Scissors, rock. You just beat me. So that's -1, 1. Bottom middle. I threw scissors, you threw paper. I beat you. That's 1 -1 and then 0, 0 again. So we filled in this whole, all 9 elements of the Cartesian product get these utility numbers for both of us. Okay? We have encoded the strategic situation of rock, paper, scissors. This is the essence of rock, paper, scissors. This is the DNA of rock, paper, scissors. For this you're paying. While we're here, let me show you something. Should look a little familiar. Observe that in every cell, all 9 cells, in every one of these cells, your utility number plus my utility number equals 0. Sometimes it's 1 and -1, and sometimes it's 0 and 0, but things always cancel out to get us to 0. This is a zero-sum game. This is what a zero-sum game looks like in Matrix world. Okay? You then should be wondering, hey, if this is a zero-sum game, then all of the outcomes should be Pareto efficient. Confirm. Pause the video. Confirm. Welcome back. So these are games. A game is a set of players, a set of actions available to each player, and for each player a utility function that reads in a strategy profile, an element of that Cartesian product, and spits out a happiness number. All right? Let me just show you what this looks like for n players. All right, so suppose that I had n players. So n equals 1, ... little n. Everybody is a player. I have n players. I could even have an infinite number of players if I wanted, but that's not very fun. So I've got n players. N might be 2, n might be 3, n might be 10, n might be a Google, n might be billions and billions, n might be a lot, okay? But I've got a finite number of players. And let's suppose that every player has some set of available actions, capital A sub I. So I've got an action set, you've got an action set, Sang-hoon has an action set, Chancellor Jones has an action set, Chewie has an action set, and so on. Every player in the game gets an action set. We give every player 2 things, an action set and a utility function. So these are their action sets, A sub I for every I in n. They might all be the same, they might all be different, they might be finite, they might be infinite, who knows? A very important case is the one where there's a finite number of players and a finite number of alternatives, but it doesn't have to be. We'll see examples where I can just choose a real number, choose a tax rate. Well, I can still make a big Cartesian product, right? I can have a big cross, and what that means is A1, Cartesian product, A2, Cartesian product, A3, ... Cartesian product, AN. So it's all possible n tuples, all possible n vectors, all possible combinations of n choices. That's a strategy profile with n players. Eventually, we're going to refer to that as a pure strategy profile, but for now, let's just call that a strategy profile. Okay? So here's a list of n choices. I went to the left, you went to the right, Chewie went to the mini-mart, whatever. A bunch of different choices. Scissors, rock. And so from that Cartesian product, every player gets a utility function that reads in a profile and spits out a happiness number. So that's an n player game. N player game, n players. Really, there's nothing different between 2 and n. You can have as many as you'd like. It's 2 versus 1 that's the interesting difference, right? That's the interesting. Going from 1 to 2, like we just did, that's the interesting thing. Going from 2 to 3 isn't very interesting. I mean, we'll see there's lots of wrinkles and nuances and so on. But in terms of the theory, the interesting thing is when we went to 2. So that's a game. A game is just a set of players, a set of actions for every player, and a set of utilities over the possible combinations of actions. That's a game. The rest is details. All right? Now, a lot of interesting and important details will emerge over time, but none of them is more important than what we just discussed. Okay? Everything else that happens will happen in the context of this. It will be a refinement of this or an extension of this. This is the foundation of our game theoretic house. Okay? So now it's come time for us to say, well, now that we know what the foundation is, let's look at a couple of different houses. Good idea. Let's go to the B block. So here in the B block, I just want to talk about some examples of games. I just want to show you some games. It's come time to show you some of the games. You've now seen 2 games. You've seen 2 very important games in all of game theory. 2 very important games. The coordination game and rock, paper, scissors. Rock, paper, scissors, you'll see different versions of it. But they all have that same rock, paper, scissors flavor. And we'll talk about that in a few weeks. So let's just talk about some more games. I want to show you an interesting game that's similar to the coordination game that comes up pretty often. It's a good introductory game. It's called Bach or Stravinsky. 2-player game, 2x2 game, very straightforward, similar to the coordination game. The idea is the following. You and I don't have cell phones and we love classical music. That's actually probably still remarkably common. Give it 20 years or so, but right now that's probably still pretty common. So we don't have cell phones, but we love classical music. And suppose that there are 2 symphony halls in Champaign-Urbana, the Champaign one and the Urbana one. And they're dueling. And so at one of them, they're having a big Bach concert. In Champaign, they're having a Bach concert. And in Urbana, where we're a little bit edgier, we're having a Stravinsky concert. All right? Now, suppose that I like Stravinsky and you like Bach, but we hate to watch music alone. We'd rather be together, but we have different preferences over which together we want to have. Okay? So how would we encode that? Okay. Well, because we don't have cell phones, we're just basically making a simultaneous choice about which concert hall to drive to. The one where they're playing Bach or the one where they're playing Stravinsky. All right? So there's 2 players, you and me. And there's 2 actions available. Drive to the Bach one, drive to the Stravinsky one. That makes the Cartesian product Bach Bach, Bach Stravinsky, Stravinsky Bach, Stravinsky Stravinsky. And the idea is, at Bach Stravinsky or Stravinsky Bach, we are stuck listening to music by ourselves, which we hate almost as much as fiery car crashes. So we get 0 happiness points there. So at either of the off diagonal, at either of the we failed to coordinate outcomes, 0-0 for us both. Okay? Now, if we both went to Bach, if we manage to coordinate on going to the Bach concert together, then you get 2 happiness points because not only are we listening together as musical companions, but also we're listening to your favorite music. You're just drinking in the rich counterpoint of Johann Sebastian Bach. And I'm there too. And I'm okay with it. I find the rhythms a little bit prosaic. Right? I'm a little bit unimpressed by some of the tonality, but I'm still happy to be there with you, so I get 1 happiness point. 2 for you, 1 for me. Now suppose that we both went through the Stravinsky concert together, right? We're both happy to be there together. We are musical companions, right? So you get 1 happiness point because you're there with me, and you're like, that doesn't seem like it's worth happiness point. Just be cool. I'm just completely nerding out on all of this polyrhythm and all of these interesting things that are happening, and the use of accents to really drive home some of the primal aspects of humanity. I'm digging this Stravinsky concert, so I get 2. 1 for you, 2 for me. So Bach or Stravinsky is just a coordination game. It has the same exact shape as a coordination game. Zeros where you didn't coordinate, and things that are better than 0 when you did coordinate. I just got that wrong. Zeros when you don't coordinate, and things better than 0 when you do. But now we have heterogeneous preferences over the good outcomes. Bach or Stravinsky is really useful whenever multiple actors would like to coordinate. They agree that there are some things that they don't want to have happen, but they can't agree on which of the acceptable things might happen, right? So if we're 2 biggity bigwigs in a political party, and we have to figure out what we want the party platform to be, what we're going to say when we go out and give a speech. I'm giving a speech and you're giving a speech, all right? Well, it would be bad if we gave mixed messages. We want to be delivering the same message, but if I'm delivering your message, then you get 2 and I get 1, and if you're delivering my message, then I get 2 and you get 1. Or if we're trying to agree to a peace deal, we both agree that war would be bad, but you like peaceful deals that get you more stuff, and I like peaceful deals that get me more stuff. We have different preferences over the goodies. This is also useful for the question of state formation, right? So suppose that we're 2 different factions that are trying to make a state together, and we would like to coordinate on deciding upon the institutions, the organs of the government that will rule us together as 2 parties become 1. But we have different preferences over whose group ends up being the most powerful when things get started. So we have we know that we want to agree, we want to coordinate, but we can't quite figure out how. We don't agree about how. Bach or Stravinsky. Let's talk stag hunt. So the story behind the stag hunt is attributed to Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And the idea, he was trying to explain inequality a little bit. And he noticed that coordination is good, in the sense that you can do things you wouldn't be able to do without coordination. But one difficulty for coordination, it isn't, one reason that it's hard to coordinate isn't just we don't have a cell phone and we disagree about Bach or Stravinsky or whatever. But actually one difficult thing is coordination provides benefits, it's true. But you can still get something acceptable by yourself, right? And the question is, how much do the gains from working together, what's the relationship between those gains from working together and what you could have gotten by yourself? Okay, so the idea is the following. There are 2 hunters. Call them Hunter A and Hunter B. And they have 2 choices. Each hunter can either hunt for a stag or they can hunt for a hare. And the idea is that getting a stag requires both of them. They have to corner the stag. I've never hunted before, but you get the idea. A stag is a big catch, and it takes multiple hunters to go get it. All right? And they like that. They're very happy if they get a stag. It only takes 1 person to get a hare, though. You can catch a hare by yourself. All right? So the idea here is that if we manage to both go for the stag, then we get a bonus. But if I go for a stag without you going for a stag, if I hunt for a stag and you go for a hare all by yourself, then I'm stuck with nothing and you got a hare. All right? So let's think that through. We've got two actors, the hunters. Each has a doubleton action set, stag or hare. That means we've got 4 possibilities. Stag, 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 hare, hare, stag, hare, hare. And so I'm going to assign a utility of 2 for both hunters if they both go for the stag. So if they both go for the stag, they get to divide the stag spoils, and so they get 2 each. Now, if Hunter A goes for a hare, then they get the hare, and that's worth 1. But Hunter B gets nothing because they went for a stag by themselves, and so that's a 0 for them. Similarly, if Hunter A goes for the stag and Hunter B goes for the hare, well then 0 points for Hunter A because they were looking for a stag and they went by themselves, and 1 for Hunter B because they got the hare. And if they both go for a hair, then they each get a hair and it's 1-1. All right? Now notice that the stag outcome, the stag outcome, 2-2, Pareto dominates all three of the others. Right? This is probably way too small for how big I've drawn the game. So just imagine, right? So does that mean it's going to be the only prediction that could happen? No. That means that in this particular strategic situation, the alignment of the happiness point functions, the alignment of the utility functions has created Pareto dominance. It's created a single unique Pareto efficient outcome. Whether that's achievable is a different question. All right? But the stag hunt has that flavor where one of the outcomes, if you look at it, looks best. Right? I don't mind saying that. I like the stag outcome more than I like the other three outcomes. In fact, I like stag, and then I like hair, and then hair, Pareto dominates the other two. So stag, Pareto dominates hair, and hair, Pareto dominates the other two. Think about that in a doodle. Just put that, make a utility imputation doodle like we had on the last problem set, right? So if I've got Hunter A's utility on the horizontal axis, and I've got Hunter B's utility on the vertical axis, right? Then I've got a 1-0 and a 0-1. I've got a 1-1, and I've got a 2-2. Right? So there is one of these is the most northeasterly. A social planner would have no ambiguity about what to do. The social planner would say, hey, you go get a stag and you go get a stag. But there is no social planner in game theory. We're assuming that the outcomes are determined by the interdependent decisions made by these players that happen to find themselves in this fable that we put them into. We didn't write a social planner in because we wanted to see what they would do. This is anarchy. This is anarchy. How to choose what to go hunt for is anarchy. Of course, while we're on the subject of Pareto domination, let's discuss probably the most famous of the 2x2 games, The Prisoner's Dilemma. So there's a lot of different versions of the story. So they kind of go like this. Two petty thieves get caught, and they get put into separate interrogation rooms. All right? Which is to say they're going to act simultaneously. It's just like, these are all simultaneous move games. When I make a choice and I can't condition what I do on what you do, and you can't condition what you do on what I do. That's the whole, they don't actually have to literally be simultaneous. It just means, do I get to see what you did? So we're in separate holding rooms, so no, we don't get to see what the other one does. And so they have enough evidence, the authorities have enough evidence on us to put us both away for a little bit of time, to get us for a misdemeanor. And they make us a deal. They say, if you can give us incriminating information about your partner, who is in another room and you will not hear from them, if you can give us incriminating information about your partner, we will let you go free. Right? Whatever we know about you, we will strike from your record, and you will go free, and we will convict your partner of the big crime. And if not, we'll get you for the misdemeanor that we know about. So there are 4 outcomes. So basically what we're saying is each of us has 2 choices. We can cooperate with one another, right? So we can stay silent. We can stay silent and cooperate with one another, or we can defect on one another by tattling. Okay? So I'm going to call these cooperate and defect, where cooperate means stay silent and defect means tattle on your partner. You defected on me. I mean, don't you hear that happening all the time? You are a defector in our 2-person cadre. And the preferences go like this. My favorite outcome is the one where I tattled on you and you didn't tattle on me, because now I'm at home. playing Assassin's Creed, no problems, right? And you are in jail for the rest of your life. Remarkably, I don't feel guilty. Yes, I do. I feel very guilty. I let you down. I defected. Okay, so I get 4 happiness points. My second favorite outcome is the one where we both stayed silent and only got nailed for the misdemeanor. So that gets me 3 happiness points because I had to pay a fine. All right? My next favorite outcome is the one where we both defected on one another because now we're both in jail for longer, but we're not in jail for life. And my least favorite outcome is the one where I stayed silent and you defected on me, you jerk, and I only get 1 happiness point. Okay? So my favorite is defect cooperate, then cooperate cooperate, then defect defect, and then cooperate defect. So your favorite outcome is the one where you defect and I cooperate. So when I get 1, you get 4. Your second favorite outcome is the one where we both cooperate, the CC. Your third favorite outcome is the one where we both defect, DD. And your least favorite outcome is the one where you cooperated and I defected. So we've got 2 players, 2 alternatives, 2 by 2, we've got 4, and we've put in an interesting set of numbers here. Notice the cooperate, that 3-3. Pareto dominates, defect, defect, 2-2. Right? So if we were at defect, defect, I could make both parties strictly happier by moving. If I were a social planner, I wouldn't have any ambiguity, right? I'd move this over. But I can't. There's no social planner in game theory. What happens emerges as a function about what all the players do. So bear that in mind. But again, let's just make the utility imputation doodle. We've got 1-4 and 4-1. And then we've got these more egalitarian 2-2 and 3-3. And you can see that the 3-3 is northeast of the 2-2. It's Pareto dominance. The prisoner's dilemma has so many areas of application that it's kind of boring for me to list them all. We'll work through some of those on the problem set. All right? Arms races, public good provision, all sorts of different things can be modeled as if they're prisoner's dilemmas. A lot of things in the world are in the prisoner's dilemma fable. Chicken. I love the game of chicken because it makes me hungry. So the idea from chicken comes from the movie Rebel Without a Cause, 1950s movie Rebel Without a Cause starring James Dean. And the idea is the following. Imagine 2 kind of stupid, testosterone into stupidity individuals that are trying to demonstrate just how awesome they are. And to do this, they engage in a test of awesomeness that goes like this. They both get into a car, and they point the cars at one another from far distance. All right? So I'm on one side, and you're on the other side of this big track. And we start driving toward one another. All right? And the idea of chicken is that whoever swerves first is the chicken. They're the loser of the contest of awesomeness because they're the wimpy one. Entering into this game was the stupid thing. So whoever swerves first is the loser. Both swerving at the same time isn't so bad because at least you didn't look worse than your opponent. And the worst thing of all is not swerving when your opponent doesn't swerve and then you right? So in the swerve outcome, let's call that 1-1. And I get 1 and you get 1. We both swerved. And then hopefully we can talk it out. In the world where I swerved and you didn't, then you win. You get 2. And I look like an idiot, so I get 0. And the exact opposite in the world where you swerved and I didn't. I get 2 because I look awesome. And you get 0 because you look like a chicken. However, there's something worse than looking like a chicken, and that's looking like a burned chicken. So the worst of all is if neither of us swerved, then we wind up at, let's call it -1, -1 for fiery death. So this is a game, right? This is a brinkmanship game. Does brinkmanship happen in politics? Yes. Brinkmanship happens all the time in politics. We call that IR. We call that every year that Congress tries to come up with a budget. We call that interbranch bargaining. Brinkmanship happens, right? Chicken is a model of brinkmanship. Chicken is what happens if you want to push it to the edge, but not too far. Chicken. Let's do a 3-player game just to show you that they exist. So suppose that 3 individuals are deciding how to vote. Voter 1, voter 2, and voter 3. There's 3 voters. N equals 1, 2, 3. And let's say that they have 2 candidates that they could vote for. We'll say the red one and the blue one. And let's just suppose, to keep things interesting, that voters 1 and 2 like the red and 3 likes the blue. Okay, so they want to see their preferred candidate win. And the question is, whom will they vote for? All right? So I can vote red or blue, you can vote red or blue, and our third friend can vote red or blue. Chewy can vote red or blue. All right? And we'll assume that you and I like red and 3 likes blue. Chewy likes the blue party. Well then, if I wanted to do 3, what I would do is I would say, player 1 decides which row we're in, player 2 decides which column we're in, and player 3 decides which matrix we're in. Right? So player 3 essentially tells us which world are we living in, the one where they voted blue and the one where they voted red. So now there's 2 times 2 times 2 equals 8 possibilities. We have a Cartesian product, a 3-way Cartesian product where every set is a doubleton, 2 elements. Blue or red, blue or red, blue or red. And so there are 8 possible vectors of our votes. Blue, 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 red, 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 blue, blue, red, 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 blue, and so on. I'll put them in the 8 cells of these matrices. So for example, here in the left matrix, where player 3, voter 3 voted for blue, then the top left cell of this one is the one where all 3 voted for blue. Okay? Then there's the one where 1 and 3 voted blue and 2 voted red. Over here in the red world, there's the world where they all voted red. There's the world where 3 voted red and the other 2 voted blue, and so on. All right? And we'll assume it's majority rule so that your preferred candidate wins if they got 2 or 3 votes. Okay, we can fill these in. So in the blue world, if everybody votes blue, then blue wins. So voter 3 is happy, they get 1 happiness point. And voters 1 and 2 are sad, they get 0 happiness points. All right? And actually for 3 of the cells here in the blue world, there's 2 votes for blue, and so every time that happens, that's 0, 0, 1 in terms of the utility vector. However, there's that one cell where voter 3 voted blue, but the other 2 voted red, and that makes voters 1 and 2 happy because red won, so then we ended up 1, 1, 0. Similarly, over here in the world where voter 3 voted for red, well, in one of the worlds, blue still wins. That's the one where 1 and 2 both voted for blue. So that's the one where we put a 0, 0, 1. And then everywhere else red won, so we put 1, 1, 0. So this is a game. This is a voting game. Okay? Here we've assumed that everybody goes to vote, but you could imagine adding an alternative for abstain. Then we'd have an even more complicated picture. But this is a voting game. This is an interdependent strategic voting situation where 3 voters are trying to decide for whom to vote. Interdependent. This is a game. It's a 3-player game where each player has 2 alternatives. I'll show you some more cool examples in the problem set, but that's really the core of what I want to show you, is that you can have the same basic framework, 2 players, 2 alternatives each, and depending on how you specify the utilities, which is to say depending on how you tell the story, you can wind up with very different seeming strategic situations encoded. All with I didn't have to erase the matrix. All I ever had to do was switch the labels of the actions and the utility numbers, right? So that's what made a game, was who are the players, what are the actions, and what do they want? And in fact, even just setting the players fixed, you can come up with a whole array of interesting situations. from driving cars into one another to driving cars into one another. Wait, no, there were other things too, like going to Bach concerts and driving cars into one another, and who to vote for, and driving cars into one another, and how to not defect on your crime partner, and also driving into one another. Game theory covers it all. So, what we haven't talked about is how to make predictions. So in a given game, there are a given number of outcomes. In a 2x2 game, there are 4 possible outcomes. In this 3x2 game, there were 8 possible outcomes. In rock, paper, scissors, there were 9 possible outcomes, 3 times 3. So the number of possible outcomes in a game like this will be the product of how many elements are in each of the individual action sets. So if I've got 3 choices and you've got 2, then there are 6 elements in the Cartesian product, and that's 6 possible outcomes for those 2 players. But I can do that. There's a lot of outcomes, and we haven't made any predictions. We've just said, here's how you specify all the outcomes, and here's how you assign a utility number to every outcome, and so on. But how do we begin to analyze these things? How do we narrow down the possible outcomes to the predicted outcomes? And we're going to begin that journey in the C block. So I've hidden an important assumption in all of this. So we've talked about rationality of each of the decision makers at length, right? So we know that rationality is something akin to have a complete reflexive and transitive preference relation and then choose from the maximal set of alternatives, or maximize a utility function, yeah? And so we've assumed, up to this point, we've assumed that the players are rational. Why? Well, we gave them a utility function to maximize. Implicit in giving them utility functions was saying, well, they've got preferences that I can represent with a utility function. I'm going to maximize this thing, all right? But there's another assumption baked into game theory. Not only do we assume that you are rational, we also assume that your rationality is common knowledge. So if it's a 2-player game between us, I'm rational, and you know that I'm rational. And you know that I know the game. And I know that you know that I'm rational and know the game. And you know that I know that you know that I'm rational and know the game. And I know that you know that I know that you know that I'm rational and know the game. And so on. Infinite list of I know that you know that 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 ... that I'm rational and know the game. Likewise, you know that I know that 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 ... that you're rational and know the game. There's this common knowledge of not only are we rational, not only do we know the game, but we each know that the other is rational and knows the game. It's actually a very deep, important part of all of this, is this common knowledge aspect. That I'm rational and know the game, that you're rational and know the game. Okay? I'm mentioning this because it's actually going to play a big part in a very intuitive starting point for how to analyze a model like this. I want to introduce a concept. It's called strict dominance. And strict dominance is something that occurs between 2 strategies for a player. All right? So I'm just going to throw the prisoner's dilemma up on the screen. This is the prisoner's dilemma. All right? It's a sad story. So notice something. Look at this from my perspective for now. I'm the role player. Look at this from my perspective right now. All right? And notice, conditional on you cooperating. If I knew that you were going to cooperate, if I defect, I get 4 happiness points. And if I cooperate 2, then I get 3 happiness points. All right? 4 is bigger than 3. So if I knew that you were going to cooperate, I would rather defect. Right? What if I knew that you were going to defect? Well, if I knew that you were going to defect, then if I cooperated, I'd get stuck in jail for the rest of my life and get 1 happiness point. And if I defected, I would get 2. So I prefer to defect. I strictly prefer to defect if you defect. So in other words, no matter what you do, I strictly prefer defecting. All right? That is the definition of strict dominance. In this example, for me, for role player, defect strictly dominates cooperate. It strictly dominates cooperate because for everything that you could do, the other player, for everything that you, the other player, could do, I strictly prefer to defect over cooperate. Likewise for you, notice that if you knew that we were in the top row because I was cooperating, well, you could cooperate and get a 3, or defect and get a 4. You'd rather defect. And if you knew that I was going to defect, you could cooperate and get a 1, or you could defect and get a 2. So you strictly prefer defecting to cooperating no matter what I do. All right? For you, the column player, player 2, defecting strictly dominates cooperating. All right? So the idea with strict dominance is that a strictly dominated strategy, a strictly dominated action, is one that is so bad that you can basically rule it out because it doesn't matter what the opponent does. It doesn't matter if you cooperate or defect. I wanted to defect. And likewise, it doesn't matter if I cooperate or defect. You want to defect. No matter what you do, I want to defect. And no matter what I do, you want to defect. That's just true in this story. That's how we wrote this model. And so a strictly dominated action is one that is so bad that we, as analysts, don't have to think about it. Yeah. So look, I can just draw a line and say cooperate, column, gone. Column player is not going to cooperate. And I can draw another line, zoom, and say, hey, row player is not going to cooperate. I know this because I looked at it. And for both parties, it's strictly dominated for them to cooperate. Defecting strictly dominates cooperating. And we wind up with a single prediction. We drew lines through 3 of the outcomes. And the only remaining outcome is the one where we both defect. I just employed an algorithm to study this. It's got a fancy name. It's called the Iterated Elimination of Strictly Dominated Strategies, or IESDS. And what's so powerful about this common knowledge assumption is it allows me to just keep lopping off strictly dominated strategies. I just keep lopping off strictly dominated strategies for as long as I can until I wind up at as narrow a set of outcomes as I can. And in the prisoner's dilemma, it's very narrow. There's one thing that survives IESDS, defect. And the fact that defect is the unique survivor of the IESDS algorithm is incredibly appealing in terms of it being the prediction from this model. Because if we take this rationality and common knowledge thing seriously, then there's no other way to slice it. Here's the first of many times that we'll be using the punchline of, and the prisoner's dilemma is a sad story, because the only prediction from this IESDS algorithm is defect, which is Pareto dominated by cooperate. Sad story. That 1 happiness point, that could be tens of years in jail. That could be hundreds of nuclear warheads that had to be built. It's wasteful. It's bad. Not all games are going to be as easy to analyze using IESDS as the prisoner's dilemma. So let me just throw up Bach or Stravinsky. So here's Bach or Stravinsky. Now, an interesting question is, does Bach strictly dominate Stravinsky for me, the role player? Well, if I knew that you were going to Bach, I could go to Bach and get 1, or I go to Stravinsky and get 0, right? But if I knew that you were going to Stravinsky, I could go to Stravinsky and get 2, or go to Bach and get 0. Neither strictly dominates the other. which I prefer depends on what you're doing. It's not the same as the prisoner's dilemma because it isn't such a sure thing. What I want to do depends on you. Whereas what I want to do in the prisoner's dilemma is defect. I don't want to think. I don't even have to think. I just defect. This is not the same. So in this model, the role player doesn't have a strictly dominated strategy. You can confirm for yourself that neither does the column player. And so actually all 4 strategy profiles here survive IESDS. So if we think of IESDS as a function that reads in that Cartesian product and spits out a prediction, this is way too indeterminate. We didn't narrow it down at all. IESDS didn't get us anything, right? So it's an incredibly compelling argument to lop off strictly dominated strategies because they're so bad that you would never pick them. We shouldn't even have to think about them. We never should have written it down. The prisoner's dilemma should have 1 cell, right? We shouldn't have even written it down. Bach or Stravinsky, it very much matters. So the fact that it's such a strong argument is actually the reason it's such a weak method of analysis. Most interesting things are going to have enough nuance that you can't rule an entire strategy out through a strict dominance argument. But when you can, in those few instances that you can, just lop it off. Just don't even think about a strictly dominated strategy. Never waste time, I don't know, on a problem set or on a final. Never waste time analyzing a strictly dominated strategy. Let me put this even more clearly. I'm going to hold a pen to make me look very authoritative. I know that you just want a recipe book of how to do this, and so here's your first recipe. The first thing that you should do when you see a game is to lop off all of the strictly dominated strategies, if there are any. Now, there might not be any. We can kind of put the whole thing on its head as well. So we'll refer to a strategy profile as a strict dominance equilibrium if every element of that strategy profile is a strictly dominant strategy, which is to say it strictly dominates all other strategies. So in the case of the prisoner's dilemma, defect is a strict dominance equilibrium in the sense that every element of every strategy that we mentioned, namely defect and defect, strictly dominated all other strategies. All right? These are very rare when they happen. They're like, for example, back in Bach or Stravinsky, there is no strict dominance equilibrium. Right? I can't write down a vector where everything in that vector is a strictly dominant strategy because there are no strictly dominant strategies. So this model just simply doesn't have a strict dominance equilibrium, whereas the prisoner's dilemma does have a strict dominance equilibrium. I want to show you why the word iteration is involved in IESDS. So I'm just going to throw up a cleverly constructed and not substantively interesting game. It's 2 players and each has 3 alternatives. There it is. All right. So this game is going to help us to see what's going on here. So notice that there isn't a single outcome. There are 9 possible outcomes. And I can't write down a strict dominance equilibrium. I can't write down a combination of strategies, 1 for each player, where everything is strictly dominant. Why? Well, why? Because player 1 doesn't have any strictly dominant strategies. They don't have a single strategy that strictly dominates all others. And neither does player 2. They don't have a single strategy that strictly dominates all others. However, notice that the R column for player 2 strictly dominates the C column. Going right strictly dominates going center. All right? So I can lop out this middle column. This middle column, it's like it never existed. I'm just going to get rid of it. Zoom. I hit the microphone as I went. Zoom. So now I have 3 options for the row player and 2 options for the column player because that middle column never existed. It was strictly dominated. R strictly dominates C for player 2. And player 1 knows that. Because player 1 knows that player 2 knows that player 1 knows that. Player 1 knows that player 2 will never choose C. They know that because C is strictly dominated. Player 1 knows that. So they don't have to think about that column either. That's why we're in this new world. So player 1 knows that. Well, look, now that we're in this 3-row, 2-column world, observe now that player 1 has a strictly dominated strategy. And in fact, they have a strictly dominant strategy. U strictly dominates M and D, up beats middle and down, once you ruled out that C column. So now in this new world, I can lop off 2 rows. So now I'm in a 1 row, 2 column world. We're just whittling it down. We're just whittling it down. But look, in this new world that is just the U row, L strictly dominates R for 2. Player 2, if they knew that we were in the U row, their favorite thing to do would just be to go L. So, we wind up saying that the unique IESDS surviving strategy profile is up left. And any strategy profile that survives IESDS, we refer to as an IESDS surviving profile, or even an IESDS equilibrium if we wanted to say so. So there's 2 different methods for analyzing a model. Find all the strictly dominant profiles, those are very rare. Most games will have 0 of those. And find all the IESDS surviving profiles. Now, in most games, you won't even be able to whittle too much away, and so that might be the whole game. So you see that the method of analysis that we choose has big ramifications for the predictions that we generate. Under one analysis concept, everything survives. And under another, nothing survives. And those are 2 bad extremes. We want to narrow it down. We want to go from a world with 9 possibilities to some smaller set of possibilities. From an analytical standpoint, we don't want the set of predictions to be as big as the set of possible outcomes. That doesn't narrow it down. Why did we do science? But we also don't want to generate no predictions. If we generate no predictions, then finally the people that funded the study say, and what is your prediction? And you're like, so somewhere in between 0 predictions and everything predictions is how many predictions we want. In a perfect world, we would generate a single prediction and say, this is it, I'm hanging my hat on this prediction. But neither IESDS nor this dominant strategy approach are going to get you that all that often. The prisoner's dilemma is very unique. And this clever game that we wrote down for IESDS is very unique. Okay? And this is why what we're going to talk about in the next couple of weeks is so magical. Is the fact that you get some narrowing, but not so much narrowing that you have 0 predictions. It's a tricky trade-off. It's a tricky analytic trade-off. How much precision do you want in your predictions versus how reliable do you want them to be? But in general, the best way to begin an analysis is to look at strict dominance and try to see if there's any way to simplify a strategic context into its interesting parts. Because frankly, strictly dominated strategies aren't very interesting. And moving forward in your other classes, you may see in footnotes, you're going to be one of the students that turns to the back of the paper to see what model was in the paper. Okay? And in the footnotes, sometimes you'll see, we'll assume something about the parameters to avoid uninteresting cases. You'll see that sentence written. And what they mean is, I don't want any strictly dominated strategies because that's boring. It's only interesting to focus on the strategies that at least aren't so bad that they always could be ruled out. All right? Now, I keep saying strict dominance, which you might say, well, why are you using strict as a modifier? Because there's such a thing as weak dominance, but it's far less compelling. But I'll just say it here for completeness sake. We say that one strategy weakly dominates another strategy if the utility for the first strategy is always at least as high as the second strategy, no matter what everybody else does. And it's strictly better for at least one. It's not just mass indifference, no matter what. Weak dominance isn't nearly as compelling. It turns out that IEWDS, iterative elimination of weakly dominated strategies, is a far less reliable procedure than IESDS. And IEWDS is just something that you use only in advanced things that we talk too much about IEWDS. So I'm going to say strict dominance, but that's going to be what we're talking about all the time is strict dominance, whenever it does come up. But it's an incredibly powerful concept. It demonstrates that we as analysts, when we write our fables, there are boundaries in terms of what's interesting, right? There's only so far that we could take things until eventually we get to something strictly dominant. We got to lop it off. This is like setting scope conditions. A given fable is only interesting under certain scope conditions. Only if there's certain tension, only if there's enough tension in the fable are we able to see something interesting. What is not enough tension? Strictly dominated strategies. All right? So when we focus on interesting cases, when we lop off the strictly dominated ones, that's our way of saying what's interesting about coordination, what's interesting about prisoner's dilemmas, what's interesting about rock, paper, scissors is what survives dominated strategy analysis. All right, so this is the best way to check to make sure that a fable is tidy. It has everything that it needs and nothing that it doesn't. So today's was our first lesson in game theory, and we looked at what a game is. A game is a set of players and a set of available actions for each player, and for each player, a utility mapping that reads in a profile of strategies and spits out a happiness number. We can look at this through the lenses of preference relations. We can look at this through the lenses of Pareto analysis, and you will on your problem set. So all of the things that we've talked about up to this point play a big part in what's going to come. But this also could have been what happened from day one. And so I really hope that you get a chance to internalize what a game is and what we're trying to do when we write down a game. And I'll try to design the problem set to help make sure that those lessons get taught. It's a tricky thing to do. Everything that's going to happen in the rest of this class will be layering additional nuances atop this definition of a game and discussing different methods of analysis for how we can turn a game into a set of predictions. That's it the rest of the way out. And in order to get us thinking about the relationship between a model and its predictions, I'd like to conclude with a provocative thought. Put differently, a model is a collection of assumptions. When we model something, we're saying, here are the people that matter. These are the players. And here are the available actions, here are the important actions available to them, the strategies. And here are their preferences. We'll assume what their preferences are. We make a lot of assumptions. We simplify the world quite a bit when we write down a game. Right? What side of the road you drive on, it's about much more than just picking a side and whether or not you crash. Right? Choosing what kind of a concert to go to is about much more than just choosing a concert and driving there and seeing what happens. Which is the best concert to go to depends not just on whose music we're playing and who you get to watch it with. It depends on all sorts of different things. The quality of the orchestra, the quality of the room, the temperature. Is the conductor inspired today? None of that matters in Bach or Stravinsky. Right? When we write down Bach or Stravinsky, we say, here is what matters. Here is the core tension in this model. Here is the core tension in this interaction. These assumptions are really important. But these other details, whether they're ancillary or not, of course they play a big role in what the actual outcomes that happen are. Our predictions don't take everything into account. They only take into account what we assumed them to take into account. The preferences, the players, and the actions. Not the temperature, not the conductor's inspiration level. The predictions, what actually happens in the real world, depends on much more than anything that we could ever hope to write down. This raises interesting questions. If you wrote down a model that seemed plausible and was always wrong in terms of what people did, you took its predictions, you went to the lab, or you collected data and ran a regression or something, you tested a hypothesis based on the model. We're going to have lots of comparative statics results. We've already had some, okay? It's natural to want to test those. Does a failed test mean that the model is bad? Suppose that we collected data on every pair of prisoners that got put in the separate interrogation rooms. We collected data on that, and we checked to see how often they both defect on one another. We could do that. I mean, I'm sure that doesn't happen all that often, but we could do that. Suppose that we learned that only 80% of the time they both defect. And 20% of the time, something else happens. Suppose that that's what we learned. Now, what does that mean we ought to do? Should we scrap the entire model and try to find something that does better than 80? Should we reject the prisoner's dilemma and say this model doesn't do a very good job of modeling prisoners and their dilemmata? Should we try to be incremental? Should we say that the utilities depend on demographic features or what the crime was or what city we're in or how mean the cops were or whatever? Should we take the same essence of the model and try to modify it? And does that mean that we're over-tailoring the model to the unique idiosyncratic features of each of the prisoner's dilemmata that actually played out in reality? Could we overfit our model? Could we make our model depend too much on these failed tests? There isn't a right answer to that. When the economic collapse happened in the mid to late 2000s, the housing crisis, a lot of people were angry at social scientists. They said, "You didn't predict this." That's true, not many people did. Was that a failure of the models? Does that mean that you have to retailor all the models to account for housing bubbles? Well, you should think about how to incorporate housing bubbles, but that doesn't mean you have to start all the way back at scratch if you ask me. It just means that you have to have humility. And this, I think, is another one of the important scholarly virtues that can help us to be good people if we work hard at it, is humility. And nothing is more humiliating than caring very deeply about a situation and then trying to write down a simple game for it. It's very humiliating because you care very deeply about a complex process. I care about war and trade and how they interact. And I care very deeply about it. This is important to me. I want to get this right. But anything that I write down looks like the dumbest scribble in the face of this humiliating complexity that is war and trade at the international scale. And the same goes for any decision, be it as small as how does water get managed by local county boards? There's a lot of deep, hard politics there, right? International war at the systemic level, there's a lot of deep politics there. When the aliens come, interplanetary politics are going to be so complicated. Everything about politics is really complicated. And all we have are these interesting scribbles, these fables. Every time we fail a test, must we burn the Book of Fables? And if not, how many failed tests would have to happen until you decided to burn the Book of Fables? Or is it possible that the Book of Fables has value even if it never passes a test? I think it does. I think the Book of Fables matters no matter what. I think the prisoner's dilemma matters even if it isn't 80-20. Even if it was 50% of prisoners lived up to it, 10%, 5%. The prisoner's dilemma matters even if prisoners never behave like that. It matters because it helps us to associate different states of affairs. The prisoner's dilemma is not just about prisoners. It's about arms races and public good provision and all these other things. We don't write down models to generate predictions. We care about the predictions, but that isn't the main goal here. Before we start analyzing models, just look at them. Just look at a fable and say, what is it about? Not how does it end? What is it about? What's interesting about it? What's difficult about it? What wrinkles are there? What do I love about this? What's cool about this? What's the tension? Who's getting away with something? Who's not getting away with something? Who hates one another? Who cooperates? Who likes to watch Bach together? Who doesn't? Screw the predictions. The fable matters. And now that you've seen some, just enjoy them for a week. Because once we start analyzing them, once we start performing surgery, you won't be able to see them for their beauty anymore. Without really trying. It's hard. It's really hard. Once you become a surgeon, So just enjoy them for a week. I wish I had more time to give you, but we do have to analyze them. I really can't wait to see what you think about some of these, and I hope that the problem set is a lot of fun for you. I really hope that you're starting to see this as not just a math class. There's just so much more to it than that. But no matter what, of course, thanks for watching.